In the previous video, I discussed why interpersonal justice is a necessary precondition for character education. In this video, I'll discuss how structural forms of justice are preconditions for character education. So positively, why is justice in structural conditions a precondition? And then less positively, how do inequity, homogeneity, and/or exclusion undermine character education? So we'll start with definitions. According to Madison Powers in What is Structural Injustice, or Structural Injustice by Oxford University Press, structural injustice consists of the social arrangements, including certain institutions and social practices that have highly consequential, differential, and unjust effects on individuals because they are members of identifiable social groups. So in the classroom, those structural injustice might look like underrepresentation of some groups in the professoriate, underrepresentation of some groups in the student body, like they just don't have access to places like Wake Forest. Outside of the class, those students might have less access to the resources and services that would help them thrive in the classroom, like professional networks, healthcare, transportation. And outside the class, they often have more stressors like environmental conditions that make them more likely to have asthma, or the social stresses of discrimination, or higher levels of family responsibilities because the family itself has fewer economic resources to buffer the care needs of the family. So what does that look like in the context of character education? So imagine a student is taking a psychology of poverty course, and the faculty person wants the student to be able to get into the first person experience of being someone who is experiencing chronic resource scarcity. So this might mean reading memoirs like Made or Nickeled and Dimed. So this is going to be an emotionally challenging assignment for anybody. But if a person is already at the very end of their rope because of all the stressors they're facing outside the classroom, it's going to be a particularly challenging exercise, especially if they're suffering from something like compassion fatigue, where because they're encountering the distress of somebody they love day in and day out, they just don't have much capacity to empathetically engage any more distress. Again, empathy is hard for everybody, but it's especially hard if you've already sort of met your limit. Okay, or alternatively, imagine the student is in an advanced data analytics course and the faculty wants them to practice intellectual humility by being able to recognize where their expertise is and also where the limits of their expertise is. I would have a lot of limits to my expertise if I was taking a class in advanced data analytics. So this is going to be a challenging thing for any student to do, because it's hard to say in front of your peers, here's what I know, here's what I really don't know, here's where I'm confused. That's always sort of threatening to a person's ego, but it's particularly threatening if you are the only person in a certain category in the class, especially if the category has been stereotyped in ways that would they're negative stereotypes, such that others might not expect you to be as competent in any case. So my example here is a student who knows she has to find partners for class projects, but is afraid that if she speaks about what her actual questions and points of confusion are, she won't be able to find those partners. What these two examples demonstrate is that structural injustice always makes learning harder. And I don't know that it's terribly different in the context of character education courses and courses that aren't focused on character education. But I think that maybe the difference is that because character education feels more personal, then those challenges to learning also feel more personal. That's not the sole responsibility of the teacher, but it means that we as character educators have really good reasons to participate in discussions around admissions policy or financial aid policy or recruitment strategies or student support service conversations. We have a good reason to show up in those spaces and be active advocates for our students. And there are some resources below this video that will give us some guidance on how to do that. Thank you.